Thank you, everybody. Yeah, I guess we're the last session of the day, so we'll keep it bright, keep it upbeat. This session is entitled How Data-Driven Creativity Can Reach Consumers at Scale. I guess we boil that down to, how does data help us do our jobs in radio? And our description is from personalized audio to culturally tuned storytelling. Asia's media agencies are fusing audience data with creative instincts to craft content that truly connects. What we're hoping to do in this session is understand how data is shaping briefs, localization, and media buys across Southeast Asia's diverse languages and cultures. But I dare say we're going to talk about a lot of different things, actually. So I'd like to welcome our panel to the stage. Tim Armstrong at the end from Mangrove Digital. Tim's focused on ad tech, and we'll hear a little bit more exactly what you do in a moment, Tim. In the middle, Midi Stormont, Business Development for BBC World Service. Welcome, Midi. And Ursiad Erinal from Dentsu, from an agency perspective. Maybe a little round of applause for our guests. Let's indeed start by finding out a little bit about what everybody does. Tim, do you want to kick off and give us the sort of 60 seconds on what Mangrove does and what Tim Armstrong's role in it is?
Cool, thank you. Good to be here. Yeah, just a little bit. Mangrove Digital is a small consultancy based out of Australia. We service a lot of clients locally, but also on the global scale. Our focus is really around your data and technology ecosystem. So I've spent a number of years in radio broadcast businesses, video technology, and very deep into ad technology. So we do all things digital and walk you through that process of distribution through to monetization. What is really interesting, though, and is probably very relevant for this crowd, is that Mangrove Digital is also working with Commercial Radio Australia. We're working with them in the development of a unified digital audio ID, which the networks or the broadcasters in the Australian market are all adopting, which will simplify the process of buying audio and also drive investment into digital audio through the radio networks. And then also a lot of other interesting projects that span across connected car and radio distribution.
Well, we'll come back and hear a little bit more probably about that audio ID thing in a moment. Tim, sounds very interesting, what you guys are up to. Midi Stormont from the BBC. Midi, tell us a little bit about what you guys are up to in the region and specifically what you do.
Hi, I'm Midi Stormont. I'm with World Service Business Development. I'm super excited to be in Jakarta, and I've been eating a lot, eating for maybe 4 over the past 24 hours. So eating for those absent delegates. Basically, World Service is a division of the BBC. We're the public service international broadcaster. I look after Australasia partnerships, and my colleague here, Elena, in the front row, is based in Jakarta and looks after Indonesia. And we're basically interested in placing our content with partners to extend reach. So World Service is interested in reputation, so the standards of our journalism, reach, and then finally revenue. Yeah, and I'll tell you more as the panel progresses.
Yeah, we'll dig in a little bit more on exactly what you get up to. And finally, let me introduce once again Ursiad Erinal from Dentsu. Tell us a little bit what you do, Ursiad, if that's okay.
Okay, thanks. Hi, my name is Irsyad from Dentsu Indonesia. So Dentsu is the overall agencies that covering the creative, media, and also the CXM, which is the data center management. So actually we are working from the context of how we build planning and buying for our client on the media and the creative. So we are working with all of the type of the channels here in the market, like starting from the televisions, digitals, and of course also with the radio and the different ad type also. So we are working with a lot of different brands in Indonesia. So I think we can discuss more today about how we can collaborate and bringing the nuance of the strategy part on especially on the data to the brand as well. Thanks.
Yeah, I mean, let's start by talking about that. I mean, obviously data has been of huge importance to advertisers for many years. And, you know, if you go back 20, 30 years, then data was really retrieved from viewers by filling in diaries and giving you bits of information about what people watch and so on. It's quite difficult to get the right data to make informed buying decisions. But now you're much more organized in the data. I mean, how do you take that data and use it to drive what creative you make on the agency side?
Yeah, thanks, James. So I think speaking about the data itself, currently compared with the like 10, 15 years back that we don't have much data, but now we are also overload of the data also. In this case, like the lot of data that offering from the different sources, like the first party data, second party data, third party data. So actually sometimes it make us also confused on how to build it into our media approach. But actually in the case of as the planner of the media planner is also, like when talking about the data itself, we wants to make sure that we injecting the nuance of the data and to make sure how we can tell those data into the difference of the creative. Like see for example, just one example. In Jakarta only, there are 4 million people traveling in the morning, like across of these cars, with the trains, with whatever's the public transport is.
Commuting to work, basically.
Commuting. Yeah. And actually those kind of the data actually transport into difference of the channels, like the social media, whatever it is. So from those data only, we capture all the signals that we can actually transform into the different creative actually. For example, like when I queue on the MRT of the train, for example, I can build any specific creative that actually tell more that I'm actually currently in the train currently, and I can build like the 6 seconds, 15 seconds that actually just tell about those experience. That's only one of the example.
So you're kind of immediately reflecting the experience that the listener is going through.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So that's why we are not talking about the data. It's not only about the demographic only currently. For example, like the demographic is like the 15, 25 years old. They expand like this. But the more data that we currently capture is more on the signals that we can capture from the platform or the audience itself. So the more we play around on the signals and injecting with the idea of the culture itself, the context, that's why your creativity is much more stronger and also bring strong relevancy to the consumers. That's where the idea of the brands talking about the build the creativity is coming to the place.
Okay, so let me just understand that a little bit more. So rather than that traditional demographic, you know, just age or gender or interests, it has to be in context now.
Exactly.
You're using the data to deliver creative for that particular context that the person is listening or consuming the content.
Yeah.
Wherever they could be indoor, outdoor,
Yeah.
train, car, could be anywhere.
Yes. So we just try to simplify how we capture the culture, the context, and how it can be relevant to the consumers. Those kind of the approach that we try to bring in.
Sure. Let me bring in Tim here. Tim, you know, obviously you're very focused on ad tech and online and reacting to that. When you hear that kind of commentary from Dentsu, how does the ad tech help us deliver that kind of experience to the listener?
Yeah, I think there's a couple of processes there. One is the planning process, which Dentsu have talked about in terms of who are the audience, what is the context, the environment, how do we reach them in the right way, and how do we make sure that we're, I guess, driving efficiency of spend, right, when you're talking about investment. Obviously, the execution of that or the consumption is happening via the platforms. The ad tech sits in the middle, helping with the decisioning around that. So the ad tech is pulling those signals back from the device that the listener is consuming upon, feeding that back into an engine which then executes upon the campaign. So we also have things.
So you know the location, you know the kind of device they've got, maybe other content that they've consumed, or
Yeah, well, you know, in Dentsu we'll have a data repository that collects a lot of that stuff as well, but ideally and ultimately you are collecting those signals and making decisions on them. You know, we talk a lot about AI, but these decisions have been made by ad tech systems for 10 years, 15 years, but ultimately where we are right now is we've also got the growth of programmatic to be able to make sure that we are spending what we want to spend on the audiences that we want to connect with.
Maybe let's just take a moment to define programmatic for those people who don't. Could you give us a 20 seconds? What is programmatic advertising?
Yeah, so in context, programmatic advertising is effectively the automated buying and selling of advertising. It presents a piece or an ad opportunity in an auction style format where people bid on that opportunity and the winner wins the opportunity to deliver an ad back, which means that you can adjust your buying strategy depending on how valuable a listener is for you. You might say, someone on the train on the way to work in the morning in Jakarta, I want to pay $10 for them. Someone in the car on the way to work in Jakarta in the morning, I actually want to pay $5 with them. So it is a growing area of the digital ecosystem and is a way that the agency groups are building capability to be able to feed data into that. And only bid on at certain levels the audiences that are most...
And this is an automated, instantaneous process, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
So it's something that happens, it's preset, and it will happen automatically without intervention.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. So using that programmatic data, using that context data, what kind of creative? Give us an example. You know, what kind of creative would you produce for that instance?
Yeah, I think it's I'm just trying to bring in with the context of the audio, right? For example, we do have a lot of languages difference in Indonesia. Like for example, I'm talking here Jakarta, compare with the other region, have different local language. So that's why when we try to capture those signals, the creativity that we build currently is no longer about the creativity that's also applied to all the Indonesians, but how those creativity is also applied to the relevant context of different region of Indonesia. So that's why the context of the programmatic itself that Tim also mentioned is actually we buy the audience. It's not only about we buy the space or the inventory, but we buy the specific audience. That's why when we build the creativity, or build the specific creative, for example, we do really understand what exactly the audience behavior, where are they living, what are the interests, and those are the output of the creativity that we try to generate for the consumers.
So, I mean, what if somebody's listing on the train and you want a 5-second ad? I mean, what sorts of things are you going to try to sell to them? Is it consumer goods? I mean, presumably you're not going to give them a car ad, are you? Because they're going in on the train.
Yeah,
but
yeah.
How do you define that?
Yeah, yeah. For example, in Jakarta, I'm just trying to bring in a lot of different culture here. For example, in Jakarta, we do have this Ramadan season, right? When the festive actually. So, for example, when we do those advertising in Ramadan, for example, in trend, for example, the creative audio that we build is more into the specific timing when we do the breakfasting. So that's kind of the play around of the creativity that we try to generate with those people. It's not only about the culture, it's about the timing. So it's perfectly.
So it could be about events. It could be something that's happening.
Exactly. Just like, for example, like when I'm working with some of the beverages brand, like back then, we try to build when you're opening the bottles, like the splash in your audio or something like that, bringing the experience during the festive or the context of the breakfasting that only can be delivered by the audio.
So it's something that people can relate to.
Exactly. Yeah.
Yeah. Well. Let's bring in Midi back in. Now, obviously, Midi, you have a little different experience because the BBC is not so focused on advertising, but you do have some advertising opportunities.
Yes, we do.
And just give us a little bit of a context of how the BBC uses data and what you use it for.
Yes, in terms of data and creative decisions, content-wise, data is everything. So it informs our engagement when we create content. For example, in local languages, in Bahasa Indonesia, our data shows us that we increase engagement when we've got content created in different languages. And actually, our most recent survey has shown that our largest growth is coming from Arabic, Hindi, and Tamil languages. So if we didn't have that information from data, we wouldn't then, from the content side of things, start creating this content and keep pushing it out. Sorry, not start, but keep increasing this content and keep pushing it out to try and reach that audience.
So it encourages you to make more content in those languages.
To meet the demands, yes.
Sure. You mentioned that your region that you cover is Australasia, but that's quite a wide region because that includes some Southeast Asian countries as well, right?
Yes. I'm responsible for Australia and New Zealand, Malaysia, Singapore, and the Pacific Islands. My colleague Carolina looks after Indonesia, and then we have other colleagues globally who all look after the countries around the world. So globally, BBC is producing content and distributing it in multiple languages on multiple platforms: video, audio, digital, articles, TV. So yeah, there's a big catalogue and production arm of content all across the BBC.
And specifically, you've got things like the 24/7 BBC World Service Radio.
Yes.
You've got individual news bulletins, I think you send out.
I feel like you know us better than I do, James.
Well, a long time ago, I did used to work with the BBC, and you do obviously podcasts as well.
Yes.
And on the podcast side, are you finding that that's well received across the area in Southeast Asia and Australia and New Zealand that you're covering?
Yes. You're making me jump ahead to my answers to your questions which are
Sorry.
coming up. Yes, I was going to say later on that, we have a very successful partnership with Triton. So the BBC was with a heritage advertising partner for podcasts, and we moved over the last couple of years to be completely with Triton. And what that means is that we can we can focus on what we do best, which is making content. And then with our partner Triton, we can input exactly what we need to allow advertisers to advertise on our content. So like many public service broadcasters, we have a whole list of criteria, which means we can't be partners with certain advertisers, but we can set that list in the Triton ecosystem, and then the programmatic can come in and we can have access to all of those types of advertising goodies. And our main job is just to keep creating engaging content that people want to listen to. And then Triton also has third parties that it subcontracts to, like Audacia Audio in Southeast Asia. So there's a variety of ways that campaigns can be run in our content, and that's all within the rules and regulations that we as a public broadcaster set.
So you're kind of
for our content.
piggybacking on Triton Digital's experience and able to leverage that, and you bring in the content that attaches to it.
I would say it's a complete partnership. Yeah.
Yeah. Tim, let's just talk a little bit more about ad tech and how you connect things in. And you talked a little bit about this ID that you're now creating in the Australian market, which I understand is in enabling radio stations to share data and effectively share buying, I suppose. But maybe just explain that a little bit more, what that project is trying to do.
Yeah. Look, so in the Australian market, what we find and have traditionally found is that buyers on the agency side default often to what can be easy. And buying via Spotify is a very easy, seamless process. We've, for a long time, had agencies calling out for diversity of inventory. The feedback has always been that to go and buy inventory directly from each of the four networks, or the main four networks in the Australian market, it's difficult and it's fragmented. So
tell us those four radio networks, the SCA.
So you've got Southern Cross Stereo, ARN, Nine Radio, and then Nova Entertainment. So what that has meant is that when we look at the amount of digital revenue for audio flowing into the Australian market, Spotify takes a very uncomfortable and disproportionate percentage of that revenue. So I think at the moment, as it stands, from a programmatic point of view, we have 80% of the audience and take 20% of the revenue, and Spotify have 20% of the audience but take 80% of the revenue.
Wow.
So what we have done is we have a very collaborative radio industry in Australia, and as the Commercial Radio Australia being the industry body, we have all combined together and built a unified digital audio ID, which will exist across every one of those 4 broadcasters. So what that means is that you can simply execute one programmatic advertising buy that runs across all 4 of those networks. And what the ID does is it actually deduplicates the audience. So if I was to listen on the Southern Cross stereo platform and I listened across the Nova platform, a buyer would see me as one individual. So all of a sudden, the deduplication issue, which a lot of buyers face, is resolved. And it means that the agencies can get better reach and frequency across the networks than they can on Spotify, knowing that in Australia, I think the combined reach of the networks, inclusive of podcasting, is about 12 million Australians a month, whereas the total reach of Spotify through the ad-funded subscription, or ad-funded part of their business, is 4.4 million. So it's nearly 3 times the size.
So you're hoping to turn that 20-80% round the other way for in radio's favour, right?
Exactly right. We, the collaboration amongst the networks in the market has been really impressive. The feedback from Europe and other markets has been in awe of how well the Australian market is collaborating. But there is a real sense of if we work together, we can rise the tide and we can rise all the boats off the back of that, and that local home-built content and radio can take back the lion's share of the revenue going into the market, which I think is very positive.
Do you find that here in Indonesia that radio stations, media organizations can work together to share that kind of data, or is that difficult? Do you find that frustrating as an agency trying to sell across multiple stations?
Yeah, I think it's a great point that they mentioned before about the way we trigger about the data conversations coming from the radio context. Because currently we have to realize that the brand currently is not really seeing the radio or even the other channels mix in the audio space is part of their hygiene channel mix. Because currently we only directly talking about going to TikTok, Meta, Google, right? But those platforms is actually already saturated. Can you imagine that everything that goes to those platforms, yes, we can reach, they reported the reach and frequency as our plan, but actually it's nothing to do with the brand itself because the platform is already saturated. So that's why the conversation that we are talking here currently is to the brand also, how to find the white space, including this audio or radio actually. The white space means actually the platform that actually have potential to make sure that we can talk the consumers and we have scale actually, but no one's talk about the how we can build those data capability that we can inject into our approach. So that's why those conversations that we need to trigger with the practice of industry here in Indonesia, because I believe the power of audio is there actually, but actually we haven't leveraged much those capability because we haven't much talk about the data targeting capability that should be into our the baseline of our planning approach currently.
To Tim's point, Spotify is quite well organized in this area, as indeed are some of the video opportunities like YouTube and so on. Does that make you, as an agency, look towards those opportunities as being easier than dealing with radio broadcasters, or for that matter, podcasts?
Yeah. I think there are several things that because Spotify is also already built their market strategy, right? With all of the communication, with all of the ads that the marketing platform that they do in the market also. But I still believe that with the context of radio of Indonesia, because we have a lot of, for example, like the previous sessions. Look at there's penetrations across of Indonesia, right? There's almost of the regions, they penetrated actually. So that's why those kind of the capability, because brand actually currently is also seeing others region that need to be penetrated. One thing that I need to mention here, the one of the source of growth for brand currently is no longer about the the key cities of Indonesia, but also including the 2 or 3 cities in the regions. Like that we never talked before, because actually like the platform like Nielsen is only covering like 11 big cities of Indonesia, but actually the brand also, because we're talking about the Indonesia as nationwide, the tier 2 or the tier 3 segment or cities actually the another source of growth. And that's where if you see previously, right, the radio station is actually can be.
So that's kind of almost the untapped potential outside the 11 metropolitan areas.
Exactly. And when we try to unlock those data into the conversation, actually that's can be, I think, the game changing into of how we can bring the white space into our channel mix that we can talk to the brand or we can offer to the brand actually.
And how about podcasts here in Indonesia? You know, are you seeing those as a good opportunity from an agency perspective?
Yes, because actually, if you see currently in the content perspective, a lot of us actually consume podcasts in daily basis. Not only in weekly currently, is also in daily basis. But now again, the approach that we need to bring to the brands, because as the agency, we need to bring those insight to the brands, right? So the podcast currently is a little bit different of Indonesia, because when talking about the podcast, it's not only about the audio in Indonesia, but also combination between the video and the audio, which is quite strange, which is not the idea of the original podcast, right? So that's why the barriers that we need to tackle is actually when we try to the podcast, what actually the creativity that we can inject to the podcast conversations, and the signals that we can tie back to our media planning process, which is what kind of the audience that listening to the podcast and how those audience can be relevant to the brand itself.
And broadly, I'm just interested in the Indonesia audience. Who is listening to podcasts? Is it generally younger folks? Is it folks in the cities? Is there a male, female split?
Yeah.
What's your sense?
I think we just done some research that we do it internally actually, and we cover a lot of like the 80 cities in Indonesia. And one thing that we try to see is when the podcast itself is actually more into the younger and also the millennials kind of the audience. And the way they see the role of the podcast is also already on the considerations level. So, because podcast tells longer story, right? Which is help you to build more story and the brand building to the brands.
Sure.
So it's not only about the quick ad recall, only like those 6, 7, like 10 seconds ads, but we do the podcast itself because we try to get more content and we get more conversations, and that's where the idea of the podcast is being also grown in the Indonesia. But to your point about the context of the audience is more into the younger and until the millennial segments actually.
Midi, as we look across the region, the BBC and podcasts, your business, as we've said, is across Southeast Asia, Australia, New Zealand. Are you seeing any trends in podcasts? Are you seeing some podcasts that the BBC makes that are more popular than others? What's working in podcast land for the BBC?
Ironically, the thing that still is number one for us is the Global News podcast, which is just the basic news. It's tremendously popular globally. We have done a few things which spin off that. For example, Americast, everything that Trump does, whether you like it or not, you kind of want to know or you need to know what he's going to do next. So Americast has been very popular. We've also spun off What in the World, which is a youth-focused news podcast. It's an explainer, so just explaining if there's something happening in Sudan, it's like, why is it happening? That was targeted at Zs, but it's been popular with millennials for some reason. They like things explained to them. Tomorrow we're going to be talking about a new Asian podcast that we're launching ex-Singapore, and my colleague is, who will be the editor for that, will be in the session tomorrow talking about it. But that has come out of what we've seen from the data, that there's growing interest from this region, from Asia-Pac region, in locally made content.
I mean, that's like a credit to the Beeb that you can come up with locally driven content and podcasts for this region. And it's not just about British content coming in. It's
Yes,
stuff that is very much pertinent and relevant
Yes.
to local audiences in this region.
And yes, I think it was also mentioned about visualized podcasts. We're also starting to do those more because we're finding our videos are very popular on YouTube, so we are trending more towards visualized podcasts as well, and starting to produce more of those.
And your broadcaster's good at feeding back information about what works and what doesn't work, which you can then send back to the creative folks who are presumably mostly in London.
Well, we have GAM, which is our global audience measurement system. It's just for the BBC, and it's a massive data collection of all of our content across platforms, including partners' platforms, which informs us daily what our reach is. Our measurement for reach is weekly, and we do. It's not decouple. What did you say before? We do deduplicate. Don't know where I got the couple from. We do deduplicate. So we're not measuring the same user over and over again. And that is what really is kind of like the heartbeat for us, because it informs where we should be focusing on. And it also feeds back to our owner, which ultimately are the UK TV license fee payers, because we're funded by people in the UK who pay a TV license fee, and then also by our commercial activities from studios, our other division, and some funding from the government.
So for the BBC, advertising is still important in this part of the world, isn't it? So you need to have that relationship with partners like Triton.
We do need money.
In terms of podcasts in Australia, Tim, what's your experience? Are podcasts working well? What sort of things are working? And you have an experience at many different levels, not only the tech side, but you've been on the sales side. You've seen it from many sides, and broadcasters as well. Yeah.
Yeah, I think it's interesting, right? Generally, when you talk about audio, people try to delineate to say you've got linear and then you've got digital. In the Australian market, I think it's very similar in other markets around the world. Digital streaming radio is a very different sell to podcasting. And that you will find in podcasting in particular, there are a lot more integration opportunities. If we take some of the learnings and the insights out of the podcast show in London, there's a very heavy focus on the broader community aspect of podcasting. So it's not just about putting ads in the podcast, it's about the social presence, the YouTube presence, everything else that evolves around that podcast and its brand. Definitely through my experience working for a broadcaster in Australia, we probably found that predominantly podcasting was still sold handheld to the agency groups, and there was a lot of work there around breaking through the stigma around podcasts that fell into categories such as true crime, to shift that conversation to be, it's about the audience, not necessarily about the content they're listening to. So it is an evolving space, but I guess in Australia as well, we also operate in a market where we get a plethora of international podcasts that are consumed down under. So recently, Nova Entertainment did a deal with Diary of a CEO, which is huge. So they now represent them in the Australian market and are building a community around that brand. So it's a really interesting space because there's a lot of integration opportunities. There is some challenges around data signals coming back from your platforms like your Spotify's, Apples and the Googles, which is challenging at the best of times, but gets you in a highly discoverable platform. So I think things will continue to evolve over time. What I talked about before in terms of the audio ID for Commercial Radio Australia and the networks down there, that will also work on podcasts. And podcasts in particular is still a medium that a lot of agency groups are still learning because of some of the challenges around fragmentation, measurement, distribution, etc.
Yeah, it's super important, isn't it, that the agencies do understand the detail of this stuff, because otherwise it does tend to fall back to almost the lowest common denominator. What's the easiest that that one can do. So I guess education is super important amongst the agencies. I mean, we were talking a little bit earlier on in the introduction to the session about how data can affect the decisions. But if you, as I said, if you launch some kind of campaign and you launch that campaign based on initial data, but if the data changes in the middle of the campaign, will you see some changes to the creative brought around by that?
Yeah, I think it's easier for us to create.
How quick can you move?
Yeah,
Can you change it quickly?
Yes, with the context of the programmatic also that Tim mentioned before, that creating the creative is no longer the much hard to do actually currently, because we do have a lot of the platform or the tools actually to build those creative quickly. But the point is, when we change the creative decision is actually based on the signals that we capture with the data that we capture actually. And I think we do have a lot of experience in changing or pivoting everything that we do in the certain of the campaign. So we never only, this is launched and we just waiting the result on the next 4-6 weeks. It's no longer like that. So every day or every 3 days actually we do have some optimizations and how we see this, if this creative is also actually relevant to the brand, how the consumers engaging with the creative, and based on the signal that we get, any others potential tweak that we need to adjust on the creative. And those other things is actually important currently to make sure that we are on the agile situations currently, to make sure that the data-driven approach is not only applied to all of the certain channels that we do, but also with all of the channels, including the audio itself, that we try to expect it actually.
Sure. As you put together campaigns here in Indonesia, do you take a look at other Southeast Asian countries? Do you compare what works in say Singapore or Malaysia or Thailand, Philippines? And how do you see the differences with Indonesia?
Yeah, actually, because for example, especially when we're also working with the multinationals brand, right? With they also presence in others market in the Southeast Asia. So, and we do also have the college in the Densu, in, for example, in the others regions. So that's why our data center is not actually, can be only accessed with the certain regions or certain market, but also can also accessed by others market actually. So that's why when we do have
you can learn from them as
exactly.
well, right?
And even currently the conversation that we have, that Indonesia even also managing the several market also, because we do have capability in like more quickly in the optimization. So that's why we also try to manage other country like the Cambodia or others part of the region, that actually giving us more insight and actually what's going on the others side of the Southeast Asia also.
Midi, as you look around the region, do you get different reactions to your content from different parts of the region? I think you're doing quite well, as I understand it, in Malaysia at the moment.
Yes, we've just recently surveyed Malaysia and found that we've really increased engagement in that country, which was a surprise to us. So now we're analysing, because we increased it in English, which actually goes against everything I said earlier about languages. But we also increased in languages, so we're just now testing what we'll do in that market to develop that reach further.
And presumably, Pacific Islands or places like that give different reactions as well to the content, right?
Yes, they do. The reactions are, it's surprising actually. Football, soccer our football shows are actually popular globally, like Football Daily is popular globally. So it is quite surprising in countries where you think maybe only rugby union or league might be prominent. There is a slow emergence of the round ball, that's all I'll say.
Tim, I'm sure you've got quite a good experience around the region, around the world. Sitting as you do in Australia, do you look to other countries to get feedback about how things like the ad tech is working, perhaps the US, UK? How's the rest of Asia doing? Do you get a sense of that?
Yeah, look, for me, even going into my time at Nova and post that now, it is a big part. I think there are always more advanced countries around the world in different ways. And I definitely think that, one of the transformational changes for radio in particular is to look outside of your local country and look at what is happening elsewhere. So there are always a cornerstone amount of similarities across region in terms of how things are operating. But I think, in the world we live in now, there should be no boundaries in terms of what countries you look at in terms of getting insights. It's about what's working in one country. Are there similarities in my country? Are there some adaptations we need to make to that technology to make it work locally for us? So I think now, podcasting is very universal in particular, and I think, you shouldn't just look on your own doorstep to see what's happening in that space. And there's a lot of good opportunities to be able to lean into other markets and actually garner those insights and build them into your own thinking.
As we come towards the end of the session, let's just look ahead. What do we think is going to be happening around our region in the next couple of years, 5 years perhaps? What are the opportunities? Are there places that we each think are going to grow? Are there market sectors? What is it? What is the exciting thing? Ursula, do you want to start? What do you look forward to in the next few years? What can you see ahead?
Yeah, so if you look at the current trend, actually, one of the insights that we have, surprisingly, with whatever the economic situation that we have in the specific in Indonesia, for example, one category that's still growing significantly is the traveling, which is the almost 80% of the increase of ad spends year on year. Surprisingly, it's not only about the locals, like going to Bali or wherever in the country, but also a lot of people of Indonesia is also doing the traveling outside. For example, like that you mentioned about the Arabic content, because we do have a lot of traveling to the Saudi for the pilgrim, for example, right? But the point that I want to make sure is actually the way we connect it with the other regions, with other countries, is also quite promising. And the way we see the data and signals actually is no longer about the isolated in this region only, but the way we build the data, with the way we capture those behaviors actually is no boundaries actually, and those where our understanding of the audience is much more richer, and that's where when we try to unlock others platform like the audio or the podcast as part of the options currently is quite something that we need to have to capitalize more, to have a lot of opportunities. Thanks.
Midi, as you look forward in the next couple of years, where's the BBC going to be focusing its attention? What's the opportunity?
Actually, we've just launched a service back in June in Poland, which is a Polish language service assisted with AI, so in translation. So that's kind of a first for us to use AI in creating a language service and then launching it. And it went through all the checks and balances and passed. So if we could then perhaps do something like that in this region to extend our reach, that would be amazing. And also for the BBC, what has been very successful has been Bluey. Bluey has been making bank. So Bluey is an Australian animated girl dog, and her dad joke, her dog dad who makes dad jokes, have just swept the world. So if we can increase the reach of that content in any forms, shapes, we've got biscuits, we've got toothpaste, like everything, then we will do it.
Looking forward to that. Tim, just finally, what are you looking forward to perhaps in the ad tech space? What's the exciting thing coming up?
Look, I think technology continues to improve. I've always been of the opinion that the technology from an ad point of view in the audio space is not quite at the same level of sophistication as other channels, in particular video. So video and audio I kind of look at very closely together in a number of cases. So I think there's some evolution to happen there on the ad tech front. I think we'll see more programmatic trading of digital audio, which I think is positive from an efficiency and a cost perspective. But I do think, there needs to be some work around measurement and data in particular to really enable that growth, because we need to not forget that many of the agency groups have very sophisticated programmatic buying capabilities that have been built very heavily on first-party data, and audio being the ubiquitous channel that it is, doesn't necessarily have all of those data signals in place. So I think there's a lot of evolution to come in that space, and then I do see a trajectory that goes very fast towards converged radio trading or audio trading, which then starts to talk about audience-led, CPM-based audio trading, regardless of whether that's linear or digital.
Well, that message that we all need to work together in the audio radio space to make that happen and to compete, as we said earlier in the conversation about some of the online players. It's quite an exciting time, I suppose. So, look, guys, thank you very much for taking part. Tim Armstrong from Mangrove Digital, Midi Stormont from BBC World Service, and Ursiad Irinal from Dentsu. Much appreciated your time. Thanks very much.
Thank you,
Thanks,
James.
James.
Thank you very much. It's a great ending to our first day. Thank you guys very much. That's fascinating. That's about it. We talked at the very beginning today about reinventing radio and rethinking about how we make radio